Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll start in just a minute. All right. Once again, thanks for joining us this afternoon, now that it's officially afternoon. Um, this is our family and community webinar. Our topic today is adolescent substance abuse. And yeah, thanks for being here. My name is Amber. I'm the corporate clinical director for Fire Trees Treatment Programs. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So we do have some helpful links at the bottom of some of the slides, and that includes a link for our YouTube channel, which has all of our past webinars. We're well into our second year of hosting webinars, so there are plenty of topics that might be of interest to you. So I urge you to check those out. We do have a Q&A feature for our webinar, so if you have any questions as we're progressing through the slides, go ahead and throw those in the box. I do try to keep an eye on it as we're moving through, but certainly at the end, I will make sure that I check and answer any questions that have come up. Also, with being in our second year of this, if you have any topics that you would like to hear more about in the future, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A box as well. We certainly welcome different ideas and are happy to accommodate those requests. So some objectives for today, we're going to talk a little bit about the scope of adolescent substance use. Then we will talk more specifically about what constitutes high-risk drug use or high-risk substance use. Talking about some risk factors, outcomes of persistent or regular substance use, some protective factors, responding to substance misuse as a parent or caregiver or concerned adult, and then some additional resources. We will spend a couple extra minutes on the additional resources today because there are a couple really strong resources that I want to just emphasize that I'm excited to share. So we'll make sure to leave some time for that. Okay, so in terms of the scope, this is data from the Monitoring the Future survey. This is 2023 data. So Monitoring the Future survey has been going on since the mid 70s, I believe, and they survey both public and private school students in the United States at 8th, 10th, and 12th grade to see it's not entirely focused on substance use, but there's a strong focus on substance use and looking at substance use trends across time. So this is data from 235 public and private schools to 22,318 respondents. So we see the percentages reporting any illicit drug use in the last year. And important to know that cannabis is still considered illicit drug use, even though in some states it may be legalized. So that may change in the future, but these percentages do include cannabis use. And then any illicit substance use other than cannabis at the bottom there. And the most commonly identified drugs of use were cannabis, nicotine, and alcohol. So if we look at data from previous years. There was a decrease between 2020 and 2021 that is likely resulted from the pandemic. And those decreases that researchers saw are still holding strong. So there's been a stable or even a declining trend in illegal drug use over several years, but there has been an increase in overdose deaths among teens, especially between 2010 and 2021. And it's likely that that is related to fentanyl that's been pressed into counterfeit pills that resemble prescription medication. If we're talking about use of narcotics other than heroin, there has been a decrease in 12th graders, with about 1% reporting use in the last year. And that actually matches an all-time low that occurred in 2021 and is down from an all-time high of about 9.5% in 2004. Percentages for students that are abstaining are increased for 12th graders, with about 62.5% reporting that they abstained from any substances over the last month. And those percentages remain stable for 8th and 10th graders, with 87% and about 80 or 77%, respectively. So that's kind of a big snapshot of nationally where we are at with substance use in adolescents. And important to know too, this is just asking about lifetime use in the last month. This is not asking about high risk use. We'll get to that in just a minute. But I did want to talk briefly about what the statistics look like for teenagers in Pennsylvania. So the data that I found, teenagers in Pennsylvania are about 13% less likely to have used drugs in the last month than the average teenager. So that is putting us at about 66,000, or about 7% of 12 to 17-year-olds that report using drugs in the last month. And among those, similar to the national data, almost 85% of them report using cannabis in the last month. About 9% of all students in that age range reported alcohol use in the last month. And from Pennsylvania data, about 0.4% more likely to use alcohol than average Americans in that age group. 2.8% of teenagers met criteria for illicit drug use disorder and illicit drug use disorder, and 1.6% of teenagers in Pennsylvania met criteria for alcohol use disorder. So this may seem like kind of a rare topic to talk about, but certainly does exist and is present, and we may be impacted by it. So high risk substance use. So when do we fall into the category of like recreational use versus a higher risk use? So according to the CDC, high risk drug use is any use by adolescents of drugs with a high risk for adverse outcomes. So that is essentially their whole criteria for what is high risk drug use. So adverse outcomes then can be injuries, including driving under the influence injuries, criminal justice involvement, academic decline or school dropout, and certainly loss of life. So they specifically point out misuse of prescription drugs, use of illegal substances, and injection drugs in particular because of the increased risk of bloodborne diseases. We'll touch on that a little bit later too as an outcome. So risk factors for developing a substance use disorder or for engaging in regular substance misuse. So it's important to remember that one factor certainly doesn't cause a substance use disorder. This is a kind of complex interaction of things that we just should consider and that have a relationship with substance misuse and development of an addiction. So an environment is an important one. So that can look like high availability. That can be at school, in the community, even at home. That can include drug use attitudes as well. So if their peer group has neutral or even positive consideration of using substances, if parents are having a positive attitude about using substances, um, and having a friend group who uses substances can all kind of fall into this category. So, I mean, the parental attitudes can be a big factor. We've seen plenty of people in treatment through the years whose first substance use experiences were with their parents. So that one can be a really important one to consider. Family history and genetics is another factor. So if there is an adolescent who has certainly a close family member, but even extended family member that also has an addiction, that increases their risk for also developing substance misuse patterns or substance use disorders. And age is another one. So teenagers develop tolerance to substances more quickly than adults do. And the younger the age of first use of a substance, the more likely they are to develop a substance use disorder. So, uh, from the Center on Addiction, this is a little bit older, but this is 2018, youth who begin using addictive substances. So, for them, that includes tobacco, alcohol, illicit substances, over the counter or prescription drugs, uh, in, uh, in a way that falls into misuse before the age of 15 are nearly 7 times more likely to develop a substance use problem when compared to those who delay their first use until age 21 or older. So, and the reason the age of first use is so important is because alcohol and other substances have really potent effects on the developing brain. And the brain isn't fully developed until around 23. So, one of the last regions of the brain to reach maturity is the prefrontal cortex. And that is the area that's responsible for really what we consider to be really adult abilities. So, impulse control skills, delaying reward, like reasoning through a situation, playing the tape through. Um, and it is also, in turn, one of the most affected regions when somebody develops a substance use disorder. Okay, some additional risk factors are mental health. So, last month's webinar that is posted to our YouTube went into a deep dive on mental health and substance use. So, if you're interested in that topic, you can certainly take a look at those slides in that webinar archive. But all that to say, mental health, untreated mental health symptoms can sometimes lead to folks self-medicating through substance use. So we do still see that represented in adolescents who develop a substance use disorder. Behavioral concerns are another area. So that appears to be related to impulse control skills, positive coping skills, um, and being able to regulate emotionally. So that also ties in terms of risk factor. Low school or community connectedness. So lack of engagement in pro-social activities, clubs, engagement in school, could be academics, could be extracurriculars. That can be a risk factor for substance use and substance misuse. And lastly, trauma history. So again, this one was covered quite a bit last month. We went into a few slides on adverse childhood experiences or ACEs, but I did just want to recall that for in a survey that was done that had adolescents receiving substance use treatment, there was 70% of them that had a history or acknowledge a history of trauma exposure. So trauma history can be is really connected to use of substances and development of a substance use disorder. So outcomes of persistent uh, drug use. So mental health problems. So this is can be kind of a chicken and the egg scenario, but exacerbated mental health symptoms and mental health problems. This was on this a quote here is from childmind.org. They have a really thorough article, Mental Health Disorders and Substance Use. But they cited that there was a 2016 study of 10,000 adolescents, and 2/3 of them who developed some sort of substance disorder had at least one mental health disorder as well. So we see, kind of a cyclical relationship here. Poor peer relationships is another outcome. That is related to the stigma of substance use. That can involve the adolescent isolating themselves from other peers as well, and also pushing them more toward peers who have a more favorable view of substance use. So in terms of warning signs, if there is a pretty noticeable change in friend group, that can be something to pay attention to as well if there are some concerns about an adolescent who may be using substances. And then, of course, involvement with juvenile justice systems. Academic difficulties is another big area, so we'll take just a little bit closer look with some research from 2015. It's a little bit old, but still worth taking a look at, I think. So this is from the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and this chart is looking at marijuana use. So compared to students with lower grades, they found that students with higher grades are less likely to have ever reported cannabis use or to have tried cannabis before the age of 13. So I thought that that was interesting. We'll look at illicit drugs in just the next slide here, but 3% of US high school students with mostly A's tried marijuana for the first time before the age of 13, compared to 25% of students with mostly D and F grades. So again, not a cause and effect relationship, but something to consider. And this is looking at either opiate use, heroin use, or prescription misuse without a doctor's prescription. So compared to students with lower grades, students with higher grades are less likely to have taken prescription drugs without a doctor's prescription or ever used heroin. So here we're sitting at about 11% of high school students with mostly A's taking prescription drugs without a doctor's prescription, compared to 34% of students with mostly D and F grades. So falling grades academically as well, less school engagement can also be another warning sign to pay attention to. And physical health outcomes of persistent drug use. So, and that are associated with having a substance use disorder as an adolescent, excuse me. Can include high-risk sexual behavior, so higher rates of STDs, more partners not practicing safe sex, potentially teenage pregnancy or unplanned pregnancy. Impaired driving and driving or accidents associated with impaired driving. can be a really big cause for concern and something that's associated with persistent drug use. Overdose risk, as we talked about before, uh, bloodborne diseases, including HIV and hepatitis, especially IV substance use, and experiencing violence. So physical or sexual dating violence um, is shown at increased rates with persistent drug using adolescents, as well as being bullied or threatened. So on the flip side of that, some protective factors. So parental support and monitoring. And parental support is, can be a really big, vague term, but this was from the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, and they noted just the importance of being willing to have conversations regularly through development. So youth of parents who talk to their kids about the dangers of substance use early and often are 50% less likely to use drugs than those who don't receive those critical messages at home. So parents or caregivers, and just monitoring, being interested in the adolescents' activities, knowing they're with, knowing whether they're involved with a healthy group of peers, having a stable home environment, so managing conflict appropriately, having consistent roles and expectations, um, having consequences that are associated with the rules or expectations, um, encouraging school and community engagement, so pro-social activities, extracurriculars, those kind of things can be a protective factor. Religious involvement, being active in a youth group or church, having the presence of mentors or adult role models. So that can certainly be a parent or caregiver, but it could be somebody else in the community. And encouraging and helping to develop positive coping and problem solving skills is another protective factor that was mentioned. Okay, so responding to substance misuse. So we'll dive a little bit more into this with some of the resources that I have in the next slide, but this is just kind of an overview or like a selection of main points. But if somebody suspects that a child in their life has started to use substances, trying to have a goal-oriented conversation. So maybe considering what you might say ahead of time, having a plan for the conversation, avoiding any conversations while the adolescent might be under the influence, and having the conversation at a time when you are regulated and can kind of maintain an appropriate level of calm, although that is really challenging. Trying to maintain focus on the behavior and coming from a place of concern rather than shaming, guilt tripping, accusations, um, and really trying to maintain open lines of communication. Encouraging honesty and allowing them, practicing active listening skills, allowing them to answer questions, encouraging them to elaborate, making sure you're using open-ended questions, and trying to be curious about what happened rather than jumping right to, I know this or I found this. You do want to have the evidence, or you do want to state what is causing your concern, but also allowing them to respond. Being willing to check in regularly and revisit the conversations as needed, as we discussed a little bit before. Tying in your supports and the adolescent supports can be really helpful since this can be such a wide problem with lots of associated consequences. So, ensuring that supports are aware and can potentially help is is tied to better outcomes. And then seeking professional help if needed. So, being able to seek treatment for an adolescent, there is inpatient residential treatment, there is outpatient treatment for adolescents with a substance use problem. They are out there, and is certainly a source that you can tie in. Okay, and some resources that I wanted to make you guys aware of. So there is an app, a mobile app through SAMHSA that is called Talk They Hear You, and it seems to be current as far as I can tell. But it can help you navigate a conversation about alcohol and drug use with adolescents. So this was cited in another in the North Dakota State University PDF resource that I'll pull up here. But that one can be really accessible and could be a good option. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have an article on high risk substance use that you can find in their health behavior section. And that really discusses more on preventing high risk substance use both at home and in the school setting, and resources for parents and caregivers to engage and help prevent in both of those areas. Parentslead.org has a special topics area of their website that includes resources on drug use. So that is, I believe, broken down alcohol use, cannabis use, and then illicit drug use as separate resources. But they also have some resources on mental health, sexual health, and general wellness as well, if you're noticing some problems in those other areas. And then drugfree.org has a really robust Having Tough Conversations article, and they have a skill building course for addressing teen substance use. So those are both. The Having Tough Conversations article is a really nice resource for navigating a conversation with an adolescent who you suspect might be using substances, and it is really, really robust. But I wanted to spend our last couple minutes on the North Dakota State University. So this is a PDF that's available, and it is a super strong resource. So this goes into signs to watch for that are relevant, some facts about substance use in teenagers and adolescents, a review on risk and protective factors, brain development, but here's really the good stuff. So this talks about maintaining positive communication and some techniques to try. Things to avoid as well, not wanting to lecture, finding opportunities to teach, how to engage in active listening and reflections, starting conversations. Again, here's the two other resources as well. Things to, or approaches to avoid, and how to pivot in a way that might be a little bit more productive of a conversation. Yes, absolutely. Jen, I certainly can. Jennifer, I can certainly share an email slides out. I have everybody's email on the registration link, so I can certainly do that. And I'll just include this PDF as well, if that would be helpful. How to say with certain responses from the child or adolescent. And also, I really like this part, but talking to youth about substance use at different ages and kind of where to start, really how to focus in on prevention, um, and then some fast facts. They do have the SAMHSA's National Helpline on here as well to connect with treatment. So that can be a great resource. And of course, their references. I would guess that this is a little bit older of a resource, but like I said, I was super impressed with the kind of things outlined here. And I will just show you a quick this is the having tough conversations one as well. So, what to do if you get a denial of substance use, um, talking and listening, approaches to ask some important questions, um, some resources then on treatment. So I just wanted to point these two out as I think really, really strong resources for um, parents or caregivers or loved ones who may be dealing with their uh, child, teen, adolescent using substances. So I will include those with email. All right. And if you have any questions or questions that you want to pop into the Q&A box, I will hang out for a couple minutes. But as we wrap up here, just a reminder that our webinars are live every third, yes, third Tuesday. I should know this by now. Third Tuesday of the month at 12 o'clock. Our topic for April is going to be stimulant use disorder. We're going to talk a lot about amphetamine use in particular. So that is a topic for April. And I'm not seeing any questions come through. Oh, maybe. Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for coming. I hope that was interesting or you learned something. And I will send out those resources. And we hope to see you next month. Have a great rest of your day.